Roasting coffee at home is a great hobby, and there's so many different ways to roast coffee. But today I want to share with you 5 tips on how to have a successful roast. These tips are going to help you up your game when it comes to roasting coffee at home. So stick around. All right, thank you for joining me today and welcome to the Virtual Coffee Lab. Today we are going to focus on improving our roasting. And I want to share with you, as I mentioned in my intro, 5 tips on how we can up our game when it comes to roasting coffee. We roast coffee sometimes by habit, simply throwing beans into a pre-warmed roaster device, whatever it is, or just turning on our device, throwing our beans in and just letting them get brown and hearing them pop and then taking them out when we think it smells good or the color looks right. Well, that's only part of the story and that's only part of the challenge. And so today I do want to share these 5 tips with you. So the first tip that I want to share with you is to set a roast plan. Setting a roast plan. Not many of us are probably doing this, and we're literally just going with the wind. We're picking out a coffee that we may have purchased and putting it in our roaster and just hitting the button to go and letting the beans turn brown and hearing them snap and then dumping them out of the roaster. And that is really not a roasting plan. A roasting plan is really several things. It involves several things. One is to be able to understand the coffee that we are roasting and determining what we want the end result of that coffee to be. So if we're looking to roast for espresso and we have a Sumatra coffee, then we're going to want to roast that coffee a little different than if we would have a Kenyan coffee and we want a medium roast. And so our roasting plan is going to look different. So understanding the coffee and knowing what our end result is for that coffee, that's really the first point of the roasting plan. The other part of a roasting plan is that you have, within this roasting plan, you have your milestones, your events estimated. So if you aren't able to do this yet, over time, as you hone your skills in roasting coffee and as you understand the coffee roasting process, you know that there are 3 phases, or you'll learn that there are 3 phases of coffee roasting. Each of these phases, you can actually set a target time on paper or in your computer or whatever, phone, that is going to chart what you'd like to do. This isn't even roasting coffee yet. This is before we roast our coffee and you're setting up a plan. Your plan is to hit dry end by a certain time. Your plan is to have a certain length of time in this browning phase and then hitting first crack. How long is that going to take? What percentage of your roast do you want that to be? And then, of course, the third phase, which is the development phase. How long do you want that to last? And what temperature would you like to drop the coffee at? So if it's your first time roasting coffee, it's great to set a roasting plan, but of course you're going to have to make adjustments. If it's your second, third, or fourth time roasting this same coffee, your plan may have already been adjusted once, and then you'll want to tweak that based on the end result of your coffee. That's what a roasting plan is all about. The whole purpose of a roasting plan is for you to be able to steer the ship, not just be blown around by the wind. Not just putting our coffee in the roaster and seeing what happens, but trying to craft or determine the type of roast we want to have with our coffee. All right, now that we have a roasting plan set up, the next tip is for us to actually prepare for the roast. We will have our roaster preheated to warm the roaster up, and then we will have a charge temperature set, and so we'll want to get that prepared. We'll want to make sure that we have all of our tools, whether it's stirring sticks or whatever it is that we want to have, stopwatches, timers, phones, whatever we need to be able to watch our times. We'll want to have our logging software set up and ready to go, or have your pencil and paper ready to go to be able to chart your times and your events, so that as the roast begins, you're documenting every 30 seconds what the temperatures are and what's happening with that roast, so that the next time when the coffee roasting ends, you'll have a chance to kind of see what happened on paper, and then compare that to the result and then make changes. So you may need to add more heat or lower your heat at different parts of your roast. So you'll want to have your roaster prepared. You'll want to have all your supplies ready to go so that you can go ahead and document your roast and have things organized so that you're not scrambling for tools or pencils or timers or whatever it is to get your roast started and document it. You'll also want to have your coffee pre-measured. You'll want to have it in some sort of a device container that you can pour into the roaster when the optimal time is set. If you're using Artisan, you'll want to have it actually on and started, so that when you charge the roaster and you hit charge, you're not fumbling to hit a bunch of other buttons and you miss your charge temp that you wanted to have. You'll also want to be sure that you have whatever device it is that you're going to use for cooling. You'll want to have that set up and prepared. And just be sure that the area is clear of debris or clear of things laying around on the floor, so as you're moving and roasting, you are not going to hurt yourself, trip, or fall. All right, the third tip to a successful roast is to be able to understand and know what's happening while your coffee's being roasted. Understanding what is happening to the beans as they change, because you're applying heat over time to these beans. And what I'm referring to is understanding what the 3 phases of coffee roasting are, so that during each phase you'll know how to apply your heat and your time, and you'll know what to write down when you're marking your events and your milestones. You'll also be able to listen, watch, and smell with using your senses the roast along the way too, and correlating that to the different phases of coffee that you happen to be in. If you're not sure what I'm talking about with the 3 phases of coffee roasting, you'll see a link up here in the corner that will give you all the information that you need. One comment about that is that our senses are very important. I'll give you an example. Last week I was roasting some coffee and I made some changes to my roaster. I've been having some issues with my valve and I'm trying to get some things figured out. So I made some changes to my roaster and I noticed that the temperatures that were being recorded were a little different than I was used to. They actually read a little bit higher. And so I watched my times. I watched using the 3 phases of coffee roasting. I had all of my times and events targeted. I knew what I wanted to do, but the temperatures were showing differently. But I relied on my eyes to watch the color of the beans. I listened to what was happening with the beans. I watched the beans change in size, and I was smelling the coffee, monitoring it. So when we got to first crack, my normal temperature that I would see first crack taking place didn't happen. It happened about 5 degrees later, and I thought maybe I had missed my mark, but I marked it at the appropriate time based on the sounds and the cracking, and I went ahead and finished the roast, and my temperatures were a little different, but when the beans came out of the roaster, the color was exactly how it had been in the past. The smell was exactly where I wanted it to be, and I tasted the coffee a day later, 2 days later. I've been drinking it the last couple days, and it was delicious. It worked out really well. So even when you have environmental things or mechanical things change on your roaster, it's really important to be able to rely on your senses. All right, the 4th tip for a successful roast is to be sure that you're documenting all of the different times, temperatures, and events. We talked about that a little bit earlier, but some of us will watch the times and events, but they won't necessarily write them down, or they're not logging them. Even after the roast, reviewing your times and temperatures and events to understand what happened to your coffee, and then looking at the coffee beans after the roast is finished, comparing what happened during the roast to the result of the beans. I'll give you a few examples. One example is when the beans come out, take a look at them and look for roasting defects. That will determine really what was happening with your times and temperatures, especially your temperatures, when you put the beans in the roaster and during that first couple of minutes that your beans were taking on all that heat. Secondly, you'll want to look at the color of the beans to determine and compare that to the temperatures that you roasted. Is it an even roast? Is it an uneven roast? If it's an uneven roast, then you may have had a really high charge and fast dry time, and or you may have an issue with your beans that will require you to have a slower roasting phase to be able to have that coffee roasted evenly all the way through. You can also crack open your beans, a few of your beans, and look at the color from the outside to the inside and see if there's consistency. If you've rushed your roast and you have underdeveloped coffee, it'll be a little lighter inside than it will on the outside. You'll also want to look for things like oils, and that will give you an idea of how far you went into your roast. Sometimes you may have too much momentum and you think you're rolling through first crack when you're actually rolling through or beginning second crack. Sometimes both of those cracks can almost become one giant crack session, so to speak, because you're just flying through your roast and you're wondering how you got oils on your coffee when your roast time was short and you heard first crack, but you were actually flying into second crack. The fifth tip that I wanted to share with you is to, after looking through your beans, after logging all your data, after having your roast plan and having that on paper, and I'll guarantee you that your roast plan and what happened in the roast is probably going to be a little bit different, to compare those and to learn from your mistakes so that the next time you go to roast that coffee and you set yourself up and you have your roast plan, you've made your little tweaks, that you'll be able to be better prepared for some of the mistakes you made on the previous roast. And I anticipate those. If you're new to roasting and you're hearing this for the first time, this might be a little advanced for you. I have a whole series of videos that talk about getting started roasting coffee, and I would encourage you to look at that and then check some of my other videos out as well. There is a learning curve to roasting coffee, and depending upon the roasting device that you're using, there may be many variables that you'll need to kind of figure out. But the best thing that you can do is understand what we're doing with the coffee, what's happening with the coffee while we're roasting it. And that's why those 3 phases of coffee roasting and the link that's up here is really important for you to check out. All right, well, you may have watched this video and it may have raised some questions for you. You may have seen some things you don't understand. You may have had some experiences you want to share, and I would encourage you to do that in the comments below. So please do that. Let's engage in a conversation. That's what community is all about, and I look forward to hearing and reading your comments. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you guys like what you hear in this video, I would really encourage you to subscribe, hit the like button, and hit that alert bell for future notifications. And we will see you next time here at the Virtual Coffee Lab. Have a great week roasting.